The galaxy had known peace for eons, with countless species coexisting in harmony under the banner of the Galactic Alliance. Each race brought its strengths and wisdom, contributing to a shared era of prosperity. For centuries, nothing had threatened the fragile balance, and the Alliance flourished with a sense of invincibility. But this tranquility was shattered without warning. A new force, one unlike any the galaxy had encountered, arrived at the edge of human space, the Valdar. This alien race, powerful and aggressive, had swept across the cosmos, conquering one world after another. Their technology was far beyond anything the Galactic Alliance had seen. The Valdar's ships glided through space with ease, each vessel a massive symbol of their destructive might. Their reputation preceded them. In their wake, nothing remained but ashes and the whispers of annihilated civilizations. When they arrived in human space, they had no doubt of their victory. The Valdar believed humanity would be no different, a small and primitive race, barely scratching the surface of the stars, unprepared for the true horrors of intergalactic war. Their first strike was swift, brutal, and merciless. In just a matter of hours, the Valdar launched an attack on multiple human colonies, sending shockwaves through human society. The once thriving colonies, filled with families, scientists, and explorers, were now nothing but burnt ruins. The survivors could only look up as the night sky above them burned with the light of destroyed worlds. The Valdar had acted decisively, their superior weaponry making it impossible for the human forces to mount any meaningful resistance. The destruction was absolute. As the death toll mounted, the other members of the Galactic Alliance, who had watched from the shadows, began to take notice. Among them were species that had lived for thousands of years, and they had seen their fair share of wars, battles, and betrayals. But even they had never encountered an enemy like the Valdar. However, the Alien Council, an assembly of representatives from the Alliance's various species, had their own conclusions. They believed that humanity would soon fall under the weight of the Valdar's relentless power. After all, humans were considered one of the newer races in the galaxy, with technology that seemed laughable in comparison to the Valdar's. What had once been seen as a young, ambitious species was now viewed as no more than an insignificant obstacle. The Council watched as the Valdar continued their assault, convinced that the humans would fold in a matter of days, maybe weeks at most. Their primitive weapons, their crude tactics, they thought, there was no way humanity could stand against the might of the Valdar war machines. It is a matter of time, the elders of the Council spoke in unison, their voices echoing across the chamber. The Valdar will break them. The assumption was clear. There was no reason to intervene. Humanity was doomed. But what they failed to understand was the human spirit. The Valdar had underestimated something far more dangerous than their advanced technology, something they couldn't even begin to calculate. Humanity's resilience, the fierce will to survive, had never been truly tested. The humans had lived through hardships unimaginable, rising from nothing to become a force to be reckoned with in their own right. The Alien Council, secure in their certainty, failed to see the warning signs of the storm that was about to break. They didn't know that humanity was not just capable of adapting, they were born to endure. While the Valdar destroyed the colonies and made their presence known, they failed to realize that their violent aggression had sparked something in humanity, a will to fight back. And as the Valdar reveled in their apparent victory, the survivors on Earth began to rally. Governments scrambled to unite their scattered forces, their entire defense system becoming a singular entity. The human race, now more determined than ever, began to work together like never before. They would not let the stars be taken from them. As the Valdar pressed forward with their unstoppable assault, the stage was set for a conflict neither they nor the Galactic Alliance had anticipated. The calm before the storm was over. The fight for humanity's survival had begun, and the Valdar would soon learn the true strength of the species they thought they could crush with ease. Little did they know, humanity's greatest weapon was yet to be revealed. Despite the overwhelming force of the Valdar, humanity stood resolute. The first wave of destruction had been catastrophic, wiping out entire colonies in mere hours. Cities that had once been bustling with life now lay in ruins, smoldering from the unrelenting assault. But far from breaking the human spirit, this brutal attack only ignited something deeper within the hearts of Earth's inhabitants. A sense of unity, of shared purpose, began to stir in the aftermath of the devastation. On Earth, governments that had long been divided by politics and borders now put aside their differences. Leaders from all corners of the world, once separated by cultural divides and past conflicts, stood together with a single goal: survival. The United Nations was swiftly restructured into a new global alliance, an emergency coalition of nations formed under the banner of one common cause. The world's resources were pooled together, the greatest minds in science, engineering, and military strategy now working side by side. The sound of hammering metal and whirring machinery filled once silent factories as human ingenuity began to respond to the enemy's threats. In the early days, the focus was on recovery, helping the injured, rebuilding what could be salvaged. But as the weeks passed, a sense of urgency took over. Every scientist, engineer, and soldier understood that time was running out. The Valdar had already shown what they were capable of. The next strike could come at any moment. There was no room for hesitation. Working day and night, humanity's brightest minds began to reverse engineer the Valdar technology. The alien weapons, though far superior to anything humans had, presented an opportunity rather than a hopeless challenge. Where others saw destruction, humans saw possibility. With a combination of determination and resourcefulness, they began to adapt the Valdar's weapons to their own needs. Some technologies were too advanced to replicate, but others, such as energy shields and enhanced propulsion systems, could be understood and incorporated into human designs. The Valdar had relied on sheer strength, massive warships, devastating lasers, and indestructible armor, but they had failed to take into account the resilience of the human mind. The humans quickly realized that overwhelming force could only get them so far. It was adaptability, creativity, and the ability to think outside the box that would ultimately decide the war. As the days turned to weeks, the world watched as humanity took a stand. The human military, once considered an afterthought by the galactic powers, now transformed into a well-coordinated and skilled force. Nations that had once stood apart now shared technologies, strategies, and resources. Earth's military forces were no longer fragmented. They were a united front, working as one. And while the Valdar had taken the initial lead, they failed to predict how swiftly the human race would respond. They had underestimated humanity's ability to rally in the face of destruction. They had thought of humans as weak, isolated, and too scattered to ever mount a true defense. What they didn't realize was that humans, when faced with the ultimate threat, were not easily crushed. The Valdar's tactics had always centered around overwhelming their enemies with force. They crushed planets beneath the weight of their technology, relying on fear and destruction to pave the way to domination. But as the Valdar marched forward, they discovered a dangerous truth: humanity was not afraid. The Valdar, in their arrogance, assumed that the humans would be paralyzed by fear, that their primitive technologies and disorganized defenses would offer little resistance. But humanity had faced war and devastation before. Earth had been through hardships beyond imagination, famine, plagues, civil wars. But each time, it had risen stronger. Each time, the human race had found a way to adapt. And this time, the Valdar were no different. As the humans worked tirelessly, they began to turn the tide. The Valdar found their advances slow, their tactics less effective against an enemy that refused to crumble. Ships that had once been unassailable were now being sabotaged. The Valdar's impenetrable shields were no longer invincible, and the most unexpected weapon humanity had was its sheer will to fight. The Valdar's ships, built to intimidate, were met with human defiance, not fear. Resistance movements sprang up across the surviving human colonies, each one more organized, more prepared, and more aggressive than the last. The Valdar, for all their power, could not anticipate the speed with which humanity adapted. It wasn't long before the first wave of human-designed ships, equipped with adapted Valdar technology, were launched into space, carrying with them the combined knowledge and strength of Earth's united forces. The Valdar, once so confident in their dominance, began to question their assumptions. What they had thought was an easy conquest was now a battle for survival. Humanity had turned the tables. What was once seen as a weak, fragile species had risen from the ashes to become a formidable force. And the Valdar, caught in the web of their own underestimation, had no idea what was about to hit them. After months of grueling preparation, humanity was ready. The world watched with bated breath as Earth's first offensive against the Valdar was set in motion. The target was a barren moon orbiting a distant planet, seemingly insignificant, but beneath its lifeless surface lay a critical resource deposit that the Valdar needed to continue their campaign. The Valdar had established a massive mining operation there, confident in their technological superiority and their ability to crush any resistance. What they didn't expect, however, was how the humans would fight back. The human forces, that are still outmatched in terms of technology, had learned much from the Valdar's previous attacks. In their desperation, they had adopted a new form of warfare, one that relied on cunning, surprise, and the environment itself. As the battle began, the Valdar confidently deployed their warships, expecting an easy victory. The human forces, in stark contrast, relied on guerrilla tactics. Small, fast ships darted around the Valdar warships, using the moon's craters and rocky terrain to hide their movements. Human soldiers on the ground employed hit-and-run strategies, laying traps and creating chaos in the Valdar ranks. The Valdar, accustomed to overwhelming their enemies with brute force, found themselves in a battle unlike any they had ever faced. The humans weren't fighting with conventional methods. They were using the very environment to their advantage. The barren moon, once a silent witness to the Valdar's operation, became a deadly maze. The Valdar, with their superior weapons and technology, were unable to predict where the next attack would come from. Traps were set beneath the surface, explosive charges hidden in craters, and human soldiers emerged from the shadows, striking when least expected. The Valdar's once confident demeanor began to falter as the battle raged on. Their warships, designed for massive space battles, struggled against the guerrilla tactics of the humans. A well-placed strike from a human ship disabled a Valdar warship, sending it crashing into the moon's surface in a massive explosion. The Valdar's advanced shields were no match for the human ingenuity and their willingness to sacrifice for the greater cause. The aliens, for the first time since their arrival, found themselves at a loss. Human forces sabotaged several more Valdar warships, leaving the invaders in a state of confusion. They had never anticipated such a level of unpredictability. The Valdar had prided themselves on their military discipline, on the precision of their technology. Yet, here they were, caught off guard by an enemy they had once written off as insignificant. The chaos on the moon spread to their command centers, where the Valdar officers struggled to maintain control. They could not fathom how humans, with their limited technology, were able to keep them on the defensive. It wasn't just the sabotage and the ambushes that threw the Valdar into disarray. It was the constant human adaptability. As soon as one tactic failed, humans would shift to something else. They adapted on the fly, using their environment, their surroundings, and their sheer resourcefulness to turn the tide in their favor. The Valdar were used to fighting in a way that relied on overwhelming force, massive fleets, impenetrable shields, and precise weapons. But this was different. This was chaotic, unpredictable, and relentless. The Valdar had expected to crush humanity with ease, but now they found themselves scrambling, unable to predict the next move. The human soldiers didn't fight with the cold, calculated precision of the Valdar. They fought with the fury of desperation, the fire of a species that had nothing to lose. The more the battle unfolded, the clearer it became that the humans were not just fighting to survive, they were fighting to win. They were taking the fight to the Valdar, not with superior technology, but with the raw determination and creativity that had always defined humanity. As the Valdar warships began to crumble, and their forces on the ground became bogged down in the face of human ingenuity, the alien invaders started to panic. They could not understand what had gone wrong. Their technology, their strategies, none of it worked. The humans had broken their systems, not by matching their strength, but by exploiting their weaknesses. The Valdar had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, to turn every situation to their advantage. Now, as the battle reached its climax, the Valdar were faced with a hard truth. Humanity would not be crushed as easily as they had believed. The tide had turned, and for the first time since the Valdar had arrived in human space, the humans had the upper hand. The Valdar, once so confident, were now on the defensive. And the humans, they were just getting started. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity was not only capable of surviving, they were capable of fighting back, and they would stop at nothing to protect their home. As the war raged on, humanity's desperation was met with a surprising breakthrough that would alter the course of the conflict. In the depths of human research facilities, a group of scientists, working under the greatest pressure, had made a groundbreaking discovery. For decades, they had been experimenting with quantum technology, trying to unlock its full potential. Now they had succeeded in developing a device that could harness a powerful energy source, one capable of disabling the Valdar's advanced weapons systems. It was unlike anything the Valdar had ever encountered. These quantum devices could disrupt the Valdar's shield frequencies and disrupt their energy-based weapons, rendering their powerful warships and weapons systems useless. The human race had, for the first time, developed something that the Valdar had no answer to. As the new weapon was rolled out, it immediately shifted the balance of power. The Valdar, who had once moved through human space like a juggernaut, found their once invincible ships and weapons suddenly vulnerable. Human forces, equipped with this newfound technology, began to turn the tide. Valdar warships that had previously been untouchable were now easy targets for human attacks. The once proud fleet of the Valdar began to fall apart, their shields flickering and their weapons firing aimlessly into empty space. The tide was turning, and the Valdar had no way of stopping it. Their military superiority had been built on advanced technology, yet this quantum breakthrough had nullified it in an instant. The humans had used their ingenuity once again, not with overwhelming numbers, but with a single powerful weapon that struck at the heart of the Valdar's arrogance. The Valdar quickly found themselves on the defensive. Their fleets, once an unstoppable force, were now being scattered and destroyed by the humans' unexpected advantage. The Valdar leaders, who had been so confident in their victory, were now scrambling to find a solution. They had believed that humanity was weak, primitive, and unworthy of notice. But now, they were witnessing something they had never expected. Humanity had evolved. The Valdar had made a massive miscalculation. They had assumed that their technological superiority would be enough to crush humanity. Instead, they had awakened a force they couldn't understand, let alone defeat. As word of the new human weapons spread throughout the Valdar fleet and their allies, panic set in. The alliance of alien species, once so sure of their control over the galaxy, began to fracture. The Valdar had been the spearhead of their coalition, the dominant force that held it all together. But now that their strength had been broken, the entire alliance began to question its future. Fear spread like wildfire among the other species. The realization that humans could not only survive the invasion, but were now actively turning the tide in their favor, sent shockwaves across the galaxy. The Valdar's enemies, alien species that had once hesitated to challenge the Valdar, began to consider their options. Some began to silently side with humanity, covertly assisting the humans in their fight against the Valdar. The tide of the war was shifting, and no one could ignore it. The Valdar's once unassailable position in the galaxy was crumbling, and they found themselves scrambling for answers. The Valdar had thought humanity would be crushed beneath their boothials, an easy conquest for a race so far beneath them technologically. But now they were faced with the brutal reality that they had underestimated their foe. The humans were not only capable of fighting back, they had the drive, the intelligence, and the ability to turn the most dire situations into victories. The weapon they had developed, based on a concept that the Valdar had never even considered, was a game-changer. As the Valdar began to retreat, regrouping and trying to salvage what was left of their fleet, they could only watch as humanity pressed forward, emboldened by the success of their new weapon. The humans were no longer simply defending, they were attacking, they were advancing, and they were determined to reclaim every inch of their territory. The once proud Valdar found themselves on the verge of defeat, and for the first time since their arrival in human space, they were afraid. The alliance of alien species, once so confident in their superiority, now faced the grim truth: humanity was a force to be reckoned with. They had proven that they could adapt, that they could innovate, and that they would stop at nothing to defend their home. The war had only just begun, but already, the Valdar and their allies knew this was not going to be the easy victory they had assumed. It was going to be a fight they might not win. The Valdar, once so sure of their dominance, were now reeling from their unexpected defeat at the hands of humanity. Their technological superiority had been shattered, and the once proud fleet that had swept across the galaxy with ease now found itself in retreat. The Valdar had underestimated humanity at every turn, and now their position was perilous. They could not allow themselves to be seen as weak. Their reputation, their pride, and their control over the galaxy were at stake. In a desperate attempt to regain their footing, the Valdar launched a full-scale assault on Earth itself, hoping to break the human spirit once and for all. They sent their largest fleets, a sea of warships that stretched across the sky, intent on crushing humanity beneath their heels. But what the Valdar didn't expect was the ingenuity of the human race. Earth, the heart of humanity, was ready for them. The human military, emboldened by their earlier successes, had anticipated the Valdar's move. They had prepared not just for a physical assault, but for a psychological one. The Valdar believed that they could break the humans with sheer force, but they hadn't accounted for humanity's ability to adapt in ways beyond mere technology. As the battle began, human soldiers didn't just fight. They used deception, misinformation, and psychological warfare to undermine the Valdar's morale. They broadcasted false signals, lured Valdar ships into traps, and used viral media campaigns to spread disinformation across the galaxy. On Earth, the human population was united, but elsewhere in the galaxy, the Valdar's once loyal allies began to question their methods. The humans had shown that they could fight, that they could survive, and that they could rally the galaxy's population to their side. The Valdar had terrorized other species for too long, and now that very fear was turning against them. Through cleverly crafted media campaigns, humans spread the message that the Valdar's rule was not absolute. They exposed the brutal tactics of the Valdar to the galaxy, showing how they had crushed peaceful worlds with no mercy. At first, the other species of the galaxy watched from the sidelines, uncertain of which side to take. But as the human resistance grew stronger, and as more and more reports of Valdar atrocities surfaced, cracks began to appear in the alien alliance. Species that had long been subjugated by the Valdar began to question their loyalties. Some, unwilling to risk the same fate as humanity, began to secretly aid the human resistance. They provided intelligence, supplies, and even defected Valdar officers who had grown disillusioned with their leaders. The once unified Valdar forces began to feel the strain. For the first time, they were not facing a weak, isolated enemy. They were facing a rebellion that had captured the hearts and minds of countless others. The Valdar had relied on their terrifying reputation and military might to control the galaxy, but that power was now slipping away. As the battle raged on, the Valdar's morale began to crumble. Their fleets, once invincible, started to falter under the pressure of the humans' relentless tactics. It wasn't just the weapons they had to worry about, it was the psychological warfare that gnawed at their resolve. Soldiers in the Valdar ranks began to question the purpose of their war. They had come to conquer, to dominate, but now they were fighting against a force that wasn't just resisting, but fighting back with everything they had. The Valdar's authority was eroding. The once feared invaders were now seen by many as conquerors who had overreached, and their once loyal subjects began to turn against them. the psychological pressure on the Valdar was immense. Their enemies were everywhere, on the battlefield, in the media, and in the hearts of the alien species they had oppressed for so long. The human resistance was not just a military force, it was a symbol, a rallying cry for every species that had suffered under the Valdar's reign. The more the Valdar tried to tighten their grip, the more the galaxy slipped from their grasp. The Valdar had expected an easy war, but now they were embroiled in something far greater than they had anticipated, a full-scale rebellion, not just from humanity, but from the galaxy itself. The battle for Earth had become the focal point of something much bigger. The fight for freedom and the end of Valdar tyranny. The Valdar, in their desperation, began to realize that their plan had failed. Their reputation as the galaxy's apex predators was a lie, and the humans, no longer the weak, defenseless species they had thought them to be, had become the galaxy's true predators, striking at the very heart of the Valdar Empire. The war had reached its most critical juncture. The Valdar, once confident in their absolute superiority, now found themselves cornered, their empire fractured and their forces scattered. Humanity, against all odds, had shifted the tide of the battle, and the moment had arrived for them to strike a decisive blow. A plan had been set into motion, a coordinated, galaxy-wide counteroffensive that would send shockwaves through the Valdar ranks and shake their very foundations. The target was the Valdar's homeworld, the heart of their empire. It was a bold and dangerous move, one that would require everything humanity had learned over the course of the war. But this time, humanity wasn't just fighting to survive, they were fighting to win, and they were prepared to do whatever it took. The strategy was audacious. A small, highly trained team of human infiltrators would break into the Valdar's most secure military installations, planting a series of advanced sabotage devices in their most sensitive systems. It was a gamble, but if they succeeded, it would cripple the Valdar's ability to mount any significant resistance. The rest of humanity's forces would then launch a full assault on the Valdar homeworld, their fleets already primed to take advantage of any weakness. The first wave of the counteroffensive hit the Valdar hard. What the Valdar didn't realize was that the sabotage had already begun. Their own systems, once considered unbreachable, began to malfunction, their defenses faltering as the carefully planted devices took effect. Infiltrators within their ranks had turned their own technology against them, and the Valdar's highly structured command chain began to break down. Confusion spread like wildfire. Leaders who had once been untouchable were suddenly at a loss, unable to communicate with their fleets or control their most powerful assets. The Valdar forces, already stretched thin from fighting on multiple fronts, were now in disarray. Their once cohesive military might have been turned into chaos, and they were left scrambling to regain control. It was in the midst of this chaos that Commander Elias Kane, humanity's finest general, made his mark. Kane was a man who had seen the worst of the Valdar's destruction, but he had also seen the incredible strength and resilience of humanity. He knew the importance of this moment. As the human forces clashed with the Valdar in orbit around their homeworld, Kane broadcasted a message to the Valdar fleet, simple, direct, and filled with a kind of unshakable resolve that had come to define humanity's fight for survival. "We are not just survivors," he said, his voice echoing across the galaxy. "We are builders, we are warriors, and you will learn what it means to face the last people you ever underestimated." The message struck like a thunderclap. For the first time, the Valdar realized the full scope of what they were facing. The humans were no longer the frightened, defenseless species they had thought them to be. They were not just fighting for their survival, they were fighting to reclaim their place in the galaxy. They were fighters, creators, and warriors in every sense of the word. The Valdar had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated the human spirit. Kane's words reverberated across the battlefield, and the effect was immediate. The Valdar fleet, already reeling from the sabotage, began to falter. Their once precise, coordinated attacks were now sloppy and disorganized. Ships that had once been unstoppable were now easy prey for the human forces, who fought with a relentless energy that seemed unstoppable. The Valdar were left in stunned silence, unable to comprehend how quickly their empire had unraveled. Their ships, their forces, their pride, everything was falling apart. As human forces surged forward, taking advantage of every weakness and exploiting every opportunity, the Valdar could only watch as their dominance slipped away. It wasn't just the technological edge that had turned the tide, it was the sheer will of humanity. Their ingenuity, their resilience, and their unwavering belief in themselves had shattered the Valdar's facade of invincibility. The Valdar, who had once seen themselves as the apex predators of the galaxy, were now the hunted. Their forces collapsed under the weight of human determination, and their leadership, shattered by the sabotage, was unable to regain control. The once proud Valdar Empire was unraveling, and humanity had shown the galaxy that they were a force to be reckoned with. The turning point had come, and with it, the realization that the Valdar were no longer the ones in control. The humans had become the new power in the galaxy, and they would stop at nothing to ensure that they would never again be underestimated. The Valdar's silence spoke volumes. There was nothing left for them to say. The galaxy would learn a new lesson. Underestimating humanity would always come with a price. In the aftermath of the war, as the dust settled and the once mighty Valdar Empire crumbled, the surviving leaders of the galaxy's other species convened in a high-security emergency council. The purpose was clear: to discuss the catastrophic consequences of their failure and to determine the future of the galaxy. However, as the discussions unfolded, a chilling realization began to dawn on them all. Humanity, the species they had long viewed as weak, insignificant, and easily crushed, had proven to be far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. They were not simply the deadliest force in the galaxy. They were the one species capable of turning any situation into an advantage, no matter how hopeless it seemed. The galaxy's great powers, including the Valdar, had all assumed that humanity's primitive technology and relatively small-scale presence in the cosmos made them an easy target. Yet, against all odds, humanity had not just survived, they had adapted, fought back, and emerged victorious. Where other species might have surrendered or faltered under pressure, humanity had found a way to turn every setback into an opportunity. This discovery shook the Council to its core. The species of the galaxy, from the most advanced to the most ancient, had all been forced to reckon with the fact that humanity was not just another race in the galaxy. They were a force capable of shaping the course of history itself. In their eyes, humanity was no longer a footnote or a simple afterthought. It was a species that had, against all odds, proven itself to be a formidable power, capable of defying all expectations and even rewriting the rules of war. The Valdar, once the apex predators of the galaxy, now found themselves humbled and fractured. Their forces had been shattered, their leadership dismantled, and their once iron grip on the galaxy loosened. The surviving Valdar leaders were forced to retreat to the farthest reaches of space, their pride destroyed and their reputation in tatters. They had learned a brutal lesson. Underestimating humanity had been their most catastrophic mistake. And as they withdrew into the void, they did so with the knowledge that they would never again dare threaten humanity or any other species within reach. As the galaxy recovered from the war, a new balance of power began to emerge. No longer were humans seen as weak, insignificant, or beneath the great civilizations of the galaxy. Instead, they were recognized as an unstoppable force, a species that could not be ignored, a species that could alter the very course of galactic history. The other species, once so sure of their superiority, now found themselves re-evaluating their approach to humanity. No longer were they merely a pawn in the galaxy's power struggle. Humanity had proven it could shape the galaxy's future, for better or worse. The lessons of the war would echo across the galaxy for centuries to come. The Valdar's arrogance had cost them everything, and now the galaxy knew the truth. Humanity was a force that could not be defeated by mere weapons or sheer force. It was a force born from the relentless will to survive, adapt, and overcome. The galaxy would never again look at humanity the same way. The days of underestimating the human race were over. The galaxy had seen what humans were capable of when pushed to the brink, and they had learned that crossing humanity was not just a mistake, it was a death sentence. For the first time in history, humanity was truly free. No longer would they be subjugated, enslaved, or controlled by the whims of others. They had fought for their place in the galaxy, and they had earned it. The war had been brutal, and the scars of the conflict would remain for generations, but humanity had proven that when pushed to the edge, they would rise stronger, smarter, and more determined than ever before. The galaxy was now a different place, one in which humanity's role had changed forever. No longer would they be viewed as mere survivors. They were now a recognized and respected force, and any who dared to challenge them would do so at their own peril. The Valdar were gone, but the lessons of their downfall would remain. In the end, the galaxy had learned that humanity was not just a species to be feared. It was the species that would shape the future of the cosmos, for better or worse. And those who had once sought to conquer them now knew that to stand against humanity was to face certain defeat.